Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Teri Smith Pickens. And she's here today to share with us her new book, The-Irrational-Fear-Cure in Four Miraculous Steps. So is fear and anxiety keeping you from living your best life? Teri Smith Pickens is here to share with us a radical yet visionary approach to achieving personal and societal well-being. Now, many of you know Teri. She's an award-winning best-selling author and speaker, in addition to her work as a mental health practitioner and coach. She has inspired and transformed hundreds of lives through her coaching, speaking, and media appearances. In 2007, Teri had a supernatural revelation that changed the course of her life, giving her unrelenting courage to confront important, controversial mental health issues in children's lives and the society at large. So let's welcome to the show, Teri Smith Pickens.
Thank you, Marianne. Hello to everyone listening. I'm happy to be here today.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. And I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it goes back a good almost 20 years. I know that's a long time. That it's like in a biblical way, it says, knock, seek, and you'll find, knock and the door will be open. And I was kind of in that mode for many, many years on a faith-based trip. And it seemed like I knocked, and one day just all the stuff started. It's almost like a download in your brain. And it took me a good day to realize it's not me, because what was being downloaded, I had no knowledge of. So I didn't know. It was new information for me. And that's how it started.
Wow, that must have been such a profound experience.
It was beyond profound, because it took me almost 4 days before I realized I had to write it down, because then I didn't remember. But it was strange that it would start over if I didn't remember particulars. But yes.
You're like getting the updated volume, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Well, and so as you're going through this process, was there stuff in your life that was bringing this up, or people you were working with?
Yes, I think so. I was at the time working in a men's prison, and I was running a group that I was kind of moving them from the usual AANA. And as I learned more about that particular Alcoholics and Narcotics Anonymous, I was doing research. So I really wanted to make a difference. And I think in a way that was the trigger. But in my own private life, I was also journeying, because I had this mood thing where depression was kind of always the bottom that was very easy for me to fall into. So I had done a lot of work on myself, and now working with these men, I really wanted to make a difference. And so I was doing a lot of research.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with the research that's in this book and the things that you discuss. Oh my goodness. It's astounding. But I think this is why your book is resonating with so many people today, because I think a lot of people feel that way. They feel like, you know what, maybe I'm in a depression, or I have high anxiety, or I'm just in this area where I just don't feel okay with myself. And I think people are searching for a way to move through that.
Exactly. And you have to kind of be conscious and willing to look in the mirror, because a lot of us just get through day by day. That's why it's considered survival mode. We're just getting through the day, and we don't take time to stop and say, hey, something is not right with me or my relationship, and to go deeper into it.
Yeah, to really kind of dive into that.
Yeah.
Well, I know you start off chapter 1 talking about irrational fear. And for our listeners that are going, gosh, isn't all fear fear? I mean, they're probably going, what's the difference?
All right. And that's a good place to begin. So let's use kind of a role play. So I'm standing at the bus station waiting for the bus. It's early morning, right? And maybe my
Okay.
phone distracted me, and this is happening in real time. My phone distracted me, and the bus almost hit me. So it was one of those things that happened to you that you can't believe that you're not dead. So I jumped back on the sidewalk and, oh, thank God. And I didn't even get on that bus because I'm so anxious. I'm so nervous. I'm so frightened that that happened. Now, let's say 2 or 3 or a week later, every time I go to the bus station, my mind tells me that that same thing is happening, that the bus is coming and it's going to hit me. And so maybe what I do is I completely stop taking the bus. So now it's the fear, Marianne, but it's my mind building it. My mind is seeing the bus. My mind is seeing the bus hitting me. My mind sees me laying on the floor. And that's what make it irrational. The first time when it almost happened, that was rational. I was in the wrong place. But when my mind takes over from the fear, from the rational moment, it becomes irrational. And it's actually more empowering because it could prevent me from going out the door. It could stop me from ever taking a bus. Or it could be like a PTSD, post-traumatic stress thing, where I go to sleep or I go to bed and I'm reliving that. And the more it's not the moment that I'm in where the bus almost hit me, but it's the moment I'm in my mind, that's what makes it irrational.
Thank you for breaking that down. That makes a lot of sense, the way that you put that together,
Thank you.
and so people can really go, okay, well, maybe yeah, I mean, because, a lot of us have irrational fears. Not every day we're being chased by tigers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And parents, even I am a therapist and I treat a lot of parents where they could give you the outline of their 16-year-old or 17-year-old who just got their driver's license. They could in their mind see them texting while they drive and then a car crashing into them. And they could give you these gory details to the point where you have to stop them and say, you have creative power. Be careful about thinking like that. But that's an irrational fear that your child is going to have a negative outcome when they're driving.
You hear about that all the time where the parent has a fear, maybe like a fear of swimming, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And then before you know it, their children grow up going, I'm afraid of water too.
There you go. There you go. And that's an excellent point you're making. And for those of us in the field of psychotherapy, we hear this every day. And part of the psychotherapy is moving people to understand that those fears are irrational. They could happen if you think about them long enough, but you really shouldn't. And the other point about it is energy. We all give off energy. So if you visited me and you're that person who have those crazy fears, I begin to feel it. And I'm not comfortable with you around. It's after you leave that I sort of take a breath. So if we're people running around with those irrational fears, it's negative energy that we're giving off. And if your children live with you, they can't leave or ask you to leave. They have to live with it.
Yeah, that can be really rough then. It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
education.
Yes. Yes.
Mm. Well, and I can totally understand what you're talking about, because there are times when you're around people and you feel uneasy or you feel
There you go.
drained. And by the time
Amen.
they leave, you're just like, whew.
Oh, we
you know,
all have a family member or a friend like that. Come on.
Amen. Isn't that the truth?
Yes.
But it's funny because people can really put their finger on it. Go, okay, this is something that I can really tangibly feel,
Yeah.
and it's a real thing.
Yes. Indeed, and it's a real thing that you're hurting your children. And it's a real thing that just because we can't see something in the outcome doesn't mean it's not happening. So my passion for the irrational fear cure is the imperative that we cannot see and fail to believe that we are hurting our children, because the early childhood era is so critical. With children in that early, I would say before 6, every experience they have, their brain is in that primitive primal mode. And the brain tends to interpret just about everything, even things that are not dangerous. The brain interprets it as dangerous. And the end result of that is, if they're not protected from that, then the brain can become frozen in a protective posture. And that protective posture is what we see as anxiety. And we see it, the severity of anxiety from 0 to 10, where there are kids that are afraid to go to school, there are kids that are afraid to work, part of the social anxiety. We see kids cutting, all of that is part of the anxiety. So there is that imperative that we have to, even though we can't see it and we may not believe it, when our children are really little, because of that primitive brain, and to prevent them from being frozen in a protective posture, we have to keep them away from it. And that lends to what you spoke about earlier, that if I'm an anxious mother, every time I look out the window, I see an earthquake, I see horrible thing, my children live with me. They can't divorce me. They can't run away. But that energy that I am giving off, it's impacting my children. And just because I can't see it doesn't mean it's not harming them psychologically.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, you look at that and it all makes sense. And I think a lot of times people don't stop and really look at how their actions and just their mannerisms are impacting others.
There you go. And the irony of what you just said, people not kind of paying attention to that impact, is if they're frozen, if children are frozen in that protective posture, then they go to survival mode and have this thing called survival mode syndrome. And part of that syndrome is survival means kill or be killed. So if I'm in survival mode, I'm not concerned about anything, anyone, the world around me. I'm concerned that harm is going to come to me and I have to stay on top. So that's kind of the answer to what you just said. It's like ADD people, I'm cooking the stew before I get there. I'm in this me, and myself world, and it excludes everybody else.
Wow, that's it's something that we all need to take a look at. I mean, I just found your book so empowering because you really talk about things that it's like people don't really spend time talking about. Do you think that we're creating like a fear epidemic at this point in history?
Yes, we definitely are. I said in part of the book that, for instance, if you take COVID, you're really superimposing COVID on the irrational fear that's already there. So can you imagine how hard? In other words, when I'm threatened by something I fear, the irrational part of my brain is going to operate. But what if it's already in that mode? What if I'm already in fear? It's got to be 20,000% worse than if it were a natural fear. So we see it with COVID, and I personally have friends that are bathing in bleach, that you walk in their house and the stench of bleach will just blow you out the door. Or people wearing 2, 3, 4 levels of mask. And there are extremes. And if those of us in this era that we live in, if you've not seen it, you may not realize how bad this time is in our lives.
Yeah, there's so much going on if we really look at, how people are in their own ways dealing with their stress and anxiety. Some good, some not so good.
Right.
And, it just says all together that, we're kind of going through this really tough time.
Yes, we are. And we see where there are people who need help now. It used to be in the past, people could manage their anxiety, but we're seeing more and more with COVID where mental health is called upon. Because when you're in fear, it's the irrational part of your brain that process, and you're looking for relief in any way you can. And that's not a good thing. You still need to be able to reason things out and say, yes, this is good, this is bad, let's throw this away. When you're in the irrational part of your brain, you're just saying, bring me relief, the vaccination, whatever, just bring it. But it's not every relief that's a good relief for you. You still have to think things through in a rational sort of way.
It's, your book really teaches people new life skills that perhaps they never learned growing up. And now's a great time. While we can't really go outward, let's go inward,
Yes, 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 yes. And you don't learn it growing up because once again, it's always, everything is scaled. But if I am a parent who's suffering from survival mode syndrome, meaning I have perceptual disturbances, and all that means is I may have hoarding issues. I may be afraid of things I shouldn't be afraid of, like fruit. I may not be able to drive on a bridge. I may have mood instability where either I'm too hyper or I'm depressed and can't take care of my kids. How do we allow ourselves to teach our children, and I'm specifically speaking to parents now, how do you help your kids to learn the skills that you just mentioned when I myself am in this state of extreme skepticism? Maybe I'm defensive. Maybe I have obsessive compulsive behaviors, which for everyone just simply is what an addiction is. So in other words, I am struggling to survive. And if I am struggling in this mode of survival, what is available for me to give to my children?
They can only teach what they know. So you really have this cycle that happens where, from one family to another, they're kind of repeating some of the same behaviors.
Yeah. And we say in treatment, you can't give what you don't got. That's the lingo. But I can't give you what's not in my purse. Marianne, if you want $50 and my purse has a penny, that's about all you can get. And so part of the imperative is more when in the field of psychotherapy, more and more they're leaning towards parenting training or parenting skills. Because when the children present with the psychological problems, what happens if they're in the same environment, and the environment is generational fear and generational patterns that people cannot pull themselves out of. So you could fix a child if a child goes to a therapist, but you're only putting a Band-Aid, because then you put the child right back in that environment or setting where there's extreme anxiety and depression and so on and so forth. And it's just a matter of time that they get psychologically sick again. I was on one of my clients yesterday. This is a 16-year-old girl, and the way she describes her life, she is the parent and her parents are the kids. She has the wisdom to know what a parent should do, how they should show love, how they shouldn't speak negatively of each other in front of her. So technically, her role is almost parent, and her parents are clueless. But you go ahead, Marianne.
That's got to put a lot of stress on a young person having to be the adult and not being able to actually be the kid.
You bet. You bet. And then how does you see the outcome of that? A lot of times when people need anger management, that is the source.
Wow. I know in your book you talk about isolation, and I was very impressed in how you talk about it in a way that most people don't think of when we talk about isolation with family secrets.
Yeah, that's another huge one that came up because I'm still treating, and it came up yesterday with the child saying, and this is a teenager, so she's old enough to saying one of the terrible things in my family is if I had to describe my mother, what color she likes or whatever, I don't know her. Everything in my family is a secret. And the reason it's a secret is the bad things that happen, be child abuse or just name it. A lot of times people feel that they're doing their children a favor by protecting them from it. But in truth, children may not say anything, but they see everything that you do. They know instinctively, they know that something is going on, and that eats at them more than if you would sit them down and say, my dad abused me or my mother abandoned me or whatever. Those secrets are going to come out. And instinctively, we know when we're intimate with people and their secrets being kept. And so the isolation, the way it feeds into isolation is a lot of times people, it's a polarity of either I'm out there or I'm isolated. So if I'm isolated, it's that belief that if I don't have friends, and part of that is poor self-esteem, not learning the skills, then I could be a young person or even an older person and spend all my time alone. I have no friends. There's no one I talk to. And I'm actually comfortable in that setting. And even if my neighbor or family member say, well, let's try to get out, this person's having a party, let's go. I am not comfortable being around people, hearing certain things. I prefer to stay in that isolation with my secrets, me, myself, and my secrets. And we see how it turned marriages upside down. It's the same kind of thing where you could marry a person who is married to two other people, and you find out years later, something drastic happens. It's unimaginable that you could date someone, marry them, and they're already married to two other people and you don't know. Just think of the implication of that.
And supposedly that happens more often than people know.
Than you know, absolutely. And so a lot of this can cause isolation and children mainly. When you think of school refusal, which was huge before COVID, the irony of it is before COVID, there were programs being formed to help children to go to school. Parents couldn't get their children to go to school. So the school refusal, part of it is that isolation. The child doesn't feel comfortable in a setting. Public would be school, amongst their friends, amongst other teens. And we see it where a child goes for a job and take the test and passed it, and then they get a start date and they don't show. And part of it is isolation gives a person a sense that they're secure and safe. But as you know, as a human being, it's not good for you because we were not created to be isolated. We're created to have touch, to feel love, to conversate, et cetera, et cetera.
So do you feel that this time where we're isolating, because we kind of in some ways have to, that it's really affecting people's mental health?
Absolutely. Yes, especially older people. So I've seen the case where if my fear is irrational, and before COVID, I was kind of this anxious, because just if I quickly may say, any anxiety is a trigger just telling your mind that there's something threatening you. So if I were in that mode, then COVID came, I superimposed COVID on that, then I may be afraid to be intimate with my husband. I may, if my kids go visit the neighbor, I may want to lock them in a room for a day. But we see it mainly with older people. I have friends and I know clients who, the elderly or people over a certain age, they do not visit or talk to them from the window. And even though the person who you're isolated from may not say it, it's a sense of loneliness. Because prior to COVID, we made a habit of visiting our family members who were elderly. If you have a neighbor who was isolated, you would check in. That was kind of the human thing to do. So how do you justify that behavior now with COVID? And could some of it be irrational?
Yeah.
Meaning, why can't that person wear a mask and you wear a mask, or wear 3 masks? But maybe once a week you go in and sit down and have a chat, not from the window, because that person still need human touch. And even if you touch, you could clean yourself to oblivion, but at least let that person not be that isolated, because we're going on a year with COVID. So we're not talking a temporary 2-3 months. It's been a long period of time.
Yeah. I know most people never even imagined that it could go on this long.
Yeah.
And so there's got to be also this sense of, when is this going to end?
Exactly. But because most people are still in the irrational part of their mind, they will do whatever it takes until they have a clear end. And whatever it takes, maybe I don't have visitors, I don't visit my neighbors, I don't visit family, I'm safer just being by myself. Pardon me. And just the extremes of that, because I'm concerned that I'm going to die. And so if you take the fear, the irrational fear is usually fear of the future. It's still related to the fears that people have that are natural, where it's if you're in survival mode, one of the key ways to keep anxiety at bay is to have a sense of what's coming at you. If I could only know what's going to happen tomorrow, if I could only get a date for COVID to be done, then I will ease up, my anxiety will ease up just a little. But in reality, we don't have such a date. So where does that leave us? With more and more and more anxiety. So now we're seeing, if you watch the news, more of a call for mental health treatment for a lot of people.
Well, in some ways, I think it's good to have that discussion and that there is that call. So people are addressing mental health issues,
Yes.
or even though we're like where we're at with it, because, before it's like people really had a hard time going, hey, I'm depressed. Or you'd hear people say, well, I'm afraid to share that I'm bipolar.
Amen.
It's like, it's okay. We can talk about this.
That's why there's a stigma, which it's kind of silly, because we're mind, body, spirit. If my physical body can get sick, I go to a doctor. Why is it that I'm thinking my mind just runs off this, whatever it runs? And then, Marianne, culture is also important. Within certain culture, for example, African-American, Hispanics, it's actually criminal to say you're depressed or to say anything is wrong with your mental health. You're crazy. So you're right that this should move us, hopefully, to more and more where, even though you can't see and you can't control what's in your head, the mental, things can happen that you have no control over, but things that you could correct by getting some help. And I'll give you a quick example. One of the symptoms of survival mode syndrome is sleep. So either it's insomnia or hypersomnia, someone who sleeps too much on one end, because the syndrome is always on an extreme. I remember going to a cocktail party and I brought up the subject of insomnia. And people started gathering around from every corner of the room. And it's what you said earlier. People didn't realize that there are millions of people out there who cannot go to sleep at night. And before we know it, the conversation became a party of its own, with each person being able to give you the over-the-counter sleep aid that they use, the methods that they use. But if I hadn't brought that up, people walk around thinking it's just me. I can't sleep and I shouldn't be telling anybody that I'm taking melatonin or whatever. So that's a good example of what you just said.
Oh, that's a great example.
Yeah.
I know in my family, if you mentioned anything like that, it was a sign of weakness, and
There
they
you
would
go.
get on you.
Yes.
It's like, oh, well, you're fine. Just suck it up. Walk it off.
Yes. So you see the cultural piece of it, and there are many cultures where it's like that.
Yeah. My goodness, Teri. I mean, we could talk all day.
Forever,
I found your,
I know.
oh my goodness. Yeah. Your book is such a great resource.
Glad
and I know,
you loved it.
Yeah, we've touched on a lot of things that, people should be aware of. You also go over, and we're not going to go over that right now, but it's definitely a high point in your book, The Irrational Fear-Cure, the Four Miraculous Steps.
Yes.
And I found those to be so impactful. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
They can go to my website, www.the-irrational-fear-cure.com. So you don't need the word irrational. It's just The Fear Cure, because that was the first book. You could Google it. It's just about everywhere books are sold. And as I said, my website is www.thefearcure.com. And I'm on I'm on social media, pretty much all of them. So people can connect to me there, especially Facebook.
Well, Teri, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
My pleasure, Marianne. Thank you. Thank you so much for reading the book, because sometimes people just scroll through it and really miss the point. But I so appreciate that you took the time to digest and understand what's in that book. It's very important.
Your work is profoundly important, and everyone needs to read your book, The Irrational Fear-Cure. The Irrational Fear-Cure, again, is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Again, if you'd like to connect with Teri, you can at thefearcure.com for more information. So we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.